Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Design Office Hours. I am going to do all the social posts. One day we'll automate this. Today we're just going to post. Apologies for the background noise today. They're doing some construction, and of course, as soon as we go live, um, it's going to start up. So that's just the nature of the game. So today, what are we going to be talking about? So we got some awesome comments on the last office hours about stuff we were talking about, kind of the product and how product and design and engineering all fit together. And so today, I'm just going to expand upon that comment a little bit. And so let me pull that up, and we'll get started here. So let's go to this guy. Alrighty. So this was from Jason. Jason is a buddy of mine, and we have been jamming on product stuff. Oh goodness, for the last almost 2 years now. So I always appreciate when he has a question. So from Jason, he was asking about. So you mentioned the intersections are where many people tend to get confused in these areas, and that being kind of our bigger product discussion. And in his experience, he saw this happen across lots of different companies, and the themes he's got are there's typically what ends up happening is you have a lack of clearly defined roles and responsibilities from leadership, and then you have ineffective processes like waterfall or teams working in silos. And he was asking if we've encountered similar challenges and how would we address them. And of course, I think if you've worked in product probably longer than 6 months, you've run into these sort of challenges here. They're really, really super common. And it's funny, we work with a lot of teams that are dealing with these problems, and they always feel a little embarrassed, like, oh, we're doing this wrong, or we're doing this, that not the best way possible. And I always like to remind them, like, no, you're actually doing a pretty good job. Most cases, every team is having these issues, but of course, room for improvement here. And so definitely. What we want to be doing in both of these situations is driving for clarity as much as possible. Now, the tricky thing with this sort of problem, these are human problems, right? I think most product problems are human problems, and we forget that. We kind of say like, "Oh no, I do the checklist, I do the methodology, I'm going to get something that works really well." But in reality, we're dealing with people, right? And we need to, in the same way when we're designing, we need to understand our customer, understand our user, have some empathy for them. We need to do the same thing when we're designing systems and processes and roles and responsibilities internally as well. I think we miss that sometimes, but that's my 2 cents. And so where I start with this is I try to get to the root cause of like what is causing this. And there are lots of different things that can be leading to this. You can have really junior teams that don't know what good looks like. And so they're bringing less experience and less exposure to how teams work. And so they just can't articulate. They're like, something's off. We know we're not working like as efficiently as we could, but we just don't know how to get ourselves unstuck. Um, Sometimes you have a senior leader who's like really slammed, who should be setting these expectations, and either from again lack of experience, or they're just so busy doing so many other things they just haven't spent the time to really get granular on this. Sometimes you're just in hypergrowth, right? You're at a really growing organization, startup, or an internal org in a larger company, and no one's got time to do anything. And so these things sort of fall by the wayside. But striving for clarity and getting really, really clear exactly on like, okay, what does our team need? What do we need from a responsibilities, and delineating between the different areas of product can be hugely, hugely important as well. So um, kind of depending on so we do a little bit of root cause analysis, right? We try to understand, okay, what is, and how do we do that? We talk to people. It's there's no secret there. We just want to get in the room or on the Zoom with as many people as we can. Typically, we try not to do like focus groups here. We want to like meet one on one with people, or 1 to 2 on 1 or something like that. We're trying to avoid the hippo problem, which is the highest paid person in the room. Will sort of monopolize the conversation, and also. Large personalities will take over the conversation as well. So, in order to get everybody's voices heard and to get a more unfiltered view, we'll try and talk to as many people one on one as possible. And I encourage one on one and interviews as well. you just learn so much more. You can ask follow-up questions. People can show you things. And so sometimes people lean into surveys, and surveys can be great. They can be super, super useful, but you're gonna get what you pay for, so to speak. And so I do encourage those sort of one-on-one communications. So in talking with the team, um, and trying not to just talk to leadership, but also talk to people maybe who are in the org, you get a better sense of like, okay, why are we having these problems with communication? Are people, and also like, what are people frustrated with? That's often something we try to unpack with them. So it's a little bit of a therapy session, let people vent a little bit, but typically you'll pick up on themes really, really quickly. So you might talk to the engineers, right, and they'll be saying like, man, I it's just really hard to talk to design. They keep giving us these things that we just can't implement. We have to do all this refactoring work. And so, okay, that's a pain point. That's something we can dig into, and we can start addressing that level of communication. So, the tricky thing with a lot of these is like, people want results real fast. Like leadership is like, oh, the team's stuck. Let's get them unstuck and keep moving. Like 80% of the time, I would say it's not that fast. These are human problems, they're process problems. People have behaviors and ways of working that they're familiar and comfortable with. And we're trying to affect behavioral change, which always takes a little bit of time there. So, but once you've kind of have that baseline understanding with people, then it's a process of, okay, like what are our leading hypotheses, and what's the easiest, simplest way we can like validate these things. So if we have a junior team and they're just saying like we feel really lost and we don't understand what we should be doing right now, maybe that there's an educational opportunity there. So we could say, okay, let's do like a lunch and learn, very low like fidelity, nothing like too crazy. We'll just everyone bring your lunch, and we're just going to talk through like what a good idealized product process can look like, and then how folks on the team can slot into that. So they can start scaffolding that mental model and building up a better understanding of, okay, how do all these things fit. Um, and the end result kind of any exercise there should be some level of documentation. So and because again, we're driving towards clarity in these things here. So if we do a lunch and learn, like what were everybody's takeaways at the end of it? You could do like a little recap, and then maybe look for themes. So that's always a fun exercise. If you have a whiteboard, or you can do it on FigJam or something, you kind of say, okay, let's get everybody's themes together. Now we have a tangible artifact that we can build from. A lot of the stuff, like we do a lunch and learn and it gets thrown away. And it's like into the ether. Trying to capture some insights from that effort, because it's a big effort to get everybody in a room and to spend the time together, is really important as well. Let me keep coming back here. So yeah, so ineffective processes. So the first thing about like roles and responsibilities, that's getting as clearly defined there as possible. Is just going to be hugely, hugely helpful. And there's like, I think a lot of people try to reinvent the wheel here as well, where like we have to come up with the roles and responsibilities that are bespoke for us and work here. It's really, I think there's a lot of great templates. We don't have to come up with novel solutions for things that are well defined. Really tons of good books here. So leaders, spending maybe 10-20 minutes doing a little bit of research can go a long way to help getting those roles and responsibilities really, really banged out. I forget her, Sarah Drasner, I believe. She's got a really good book on like engineering management, and I think she's written blog posts on this as well. There's tons of good resources out there, right? So coming up with like a really clear defined roles and responsibilities is super, super helpful. Processes are harder, right? Because they're temporal, so they happen over time, and again, we're affecting behavioral change here. So it's funny. I'm thinking about an experience we had where very, very early in my career, right? This was probably my second or first like real job doing. And I was a front end engineer, but I was also doing all the product design work, UX design back then, as we called it. Still the same thing, but people would argue with me, but they're similar. That's a spicy take right there. Um, but anyway, so I was doing the design work and I was doing the front end work, and our ticketing process was really rough. It was we had tickets coming in from all over the place. People often would circumnavigate the tickets and go straight to our project manager, and just be like, "Hey, I need this done right now." And that organization had a lot of other dysfunctional issues, a lot of silos, a lot of different divisions of the organization had different priorities, and nobody was aligned, and everyone was fighting for their silo. And so just real big organizational problems here. And I was green, right? So I was pretty fresh to all this, and I was like, all right, I've read a couple project management books. Let me come in here and think about this. And what I did was I wrote up like a 20-page document on how we could improve our systems. And I wasn't wrong per se. Like like I definitely was trying my best to apply lessons from other places and bring them in here. And leadership gets all excited and people get bought into that. And we tried to roll it out, and so we basically took some of the recommendations and worked it into our process. And my goodness, if you wouldn't believe it, we did all this training, we rolled it out to the team, and people were back to their old tricks like within weeks of rolling out all this new stuff here. And so there's I think I see this trap a lot of times where people they hear something, shiny new thing like OKRs, or they're reading about a process that seems really useful, and it certainly benefits to these kind of things. But we have to start with the people. And if we try to just inject process for the sake of process, or we just try to just haphazardly apply these things without understanding like the holistic context, you're never going to get adoption, because again, we're trying to affect behavioral change here. So I again really encourage starting with, okay, what is the process? Where are we today? How do things work? And most teams don't have a good picture of that. They might see their little slice of it. Very few people have like visibility into across disciplines how things work. And so if you can document that with like a services blueprint or like a user flow, um, how does like an idea go through our product process to final output that a user is using in the code? Most teams have very low or limited visibility there. And so if you can document the current system, which I really encourage, and then instead of trying to boil the ocean and fix the whole process, say, okay, is there a part of this that we can break off here and refine? That becomes much more effective and much more digestible for the team than trying to like redo the entire thing here. So um, again, sort of it's an iterative approach, it's a research based approach, it's a human based approach, but that's what I've seen be effective, not this top down or even bottom up. We're gonna change everything at once here to make it better. Um, okay, what's the second part here? Second part, you mentioned that design should focus on solutioning. How do you define solutioning across product design and engineering? From my perspective, product focuses on identifying new opportunities, design on uncovering user experience gaps, and engineering on building scalable solutions that address both. I'd love to hear how you define solutioning from each of these roles' perspective. So this is a great question, and it comes back to like, what do we mean by solutioning here? And what I mean by that is it's typically, with any new product here. I'm just going to draw because it's more fun. You have be good if I could do it. So you have like a problem space, and you have the solution space, right? And we've all probably seen this Venn diagram or something like this, right? So you got problem, solution, and we'll just make this a slightly different color here. Great. Um, so you've got, and together, this is sort of what we do when we're kind of thinking about products. We have a problem that somebody is experiencing in their life. We want to understand that problem, and then we can start migrating into the solution space here. And so when I think of we'll just go back to session one here and grab this here. So when I think of design, product, and engineering here, and I start saying like, okay, who's focusing on what are their roles here? Typically, in my experience, product is a little bit more keyed into the problem space. They're ingesting a lot of information from users and customers and analytics. They're ingesting a lot of information from the business itself and stakeholders, and they're coming up with problems. And then design they're kind of responsible for, okay, given this problem and given our users and given our existing product experience, what do solutions to this start to look like here? Um, and I see that that's sort of what I mean by solutioning, where they're coming up with literally like, what should we do to solve these problems we've identified here? And so is product ever solutioning? Absolutely, right? There's overlap between these disciplines. Is design ever getting into the problem space? You betcha. They're in there all the time. But typically, in terms of focus, this is where I see, and I see. Thinking about this, sometimes I see really big problems where product is overstepping into solutioning, and design. I less problems with design getting more into the problem space, but from like a product perspective, I've definitely seen PMs be like too prescriptive with writing, like in terms of artifacts and how they describe the problem. So, which is human nature. It's really really hard to kind of keep your head in those two different worlds. But that can be a source of tension on the team, where you have really strict product requirements, and then the designers are like, "You just want me to draw this? Like, I'm not doing any of applying any of my creativity or my solutioning skills to this problem because it's already been predefined for." And so that can be a little bit tricky for teams to kind of strike that right balance there. But that's what we mean by solutioning, right? And so in this context, when we think about like, okay, is our PMs doing something, or designers doing it, or engineers doing it, they're at the end of the day, all of their collective efforts come together in the solution space to form the product experience. And so the ultimate solution is the product itself, right? That's what we're going for. But typically, I've seen designers sort of owning that solutioning space and kind of exploring that space and saying, okay, given this set of problems from product, here's how we might go about solving them. And again, overlaps. You got to talk to your engineers and say, are these ideas even possible? Can we solve them in this way? What are we missing? Like, you guys know and gals know the structure of the application. You know the database schemas. How can we make this a possible, make this a reality here? And that's where I see like designers. When they want to get technical, they want to level that up. It helps them in that solutioning space, and it helps them get more proactive with the kind of solutions they're seeing and they're identifying there. So that's my jam on Jason's wonderful question here. And I think they come from kind of reading the meta here. And I kind of saw some chatter around this week, and experienced this with some of our clients this week. I can't stress enough how important clarity is any team, regardless of whether you're a startup or an established organization. I think Molly Graham was talking about that this week too, which is putting it in my head. The single as leaders in any sort of product organization, the single best thing you can do is focus on clarity. Clear on what are we building right now, what are our priorities, who is responsible for what thing, and how are we going to accomplish this. As leaders, the more we can lean into that, and the more we can sort of give that structure to the team, the better results we end up getting every single time, and how I'm that confident in it. And so it becomes that's sort of the challenge. The challenge is we're so distracted by everything else going on. We've got meetings, and we've got demos and pitches, and we got to talk to investors and all the board, all these other things that happen, and we get distracted from the really really important work of how do I make this as clear as possible for everybody, so they can make the work happen. And so I can't stress this enough. So and it kind of has to come from leadership, right? You do see top down or bottom up efforts, I should say, where the team feels these problems and they say, okay, I'm going to make my boss's job easier, or my skip boss's job easier, and I'm going to start putting together this documentation and defining these things from our perspective. And if you're an employee and sort of more on the team, that can be a really proactive way to sort of address these things. Kind of say, hey, we're feeling these problems. We've put together this documentation, maybe a leveling framework, or maybe some other org data, and to start helping people shape the problem, and get in writing as much as you can. That's always my advice. Is when it's written, it's tangible. You can reflect on it, you can review it, edit it, and it becomes an artifact, right? When it's a conversation, wonderful, great. They move the needle really quickly. But then it's in the ether, right? So, and we're getting better. We've got a lot more transcription services these days, but there's almost too much noise there. And so, a nice distilled document, an illustration, a graphic can really, really go a long way. Awesome. So I've been jamming on this for a while. What other questions do we have? Do we have some more questions here? I can sit. I can also just jam on some other stuff here. Um, Let me see if I can pull this up here. There's a really good question out of this of like, what do defined roles look like? So let me see if I can find this. Design levels here. Yeah, okay. This is probably let me preface this. This is not the perfect solution for everybody, but it's a solution that I've seen like work really really well, and I can't take credit for this. I have borrowed this. I've adapted it from Molly Graham, who was at I worked with at Lambda School. Also, Sylvia, who I worked with, she did had a lot of input on this as well. But and she was a product designer, senior product designer, and is now doing great things. But we jammed on this together, kind of using Molly's framework as our starting point. And this is when people say like, "Are my roles defined? Are the responsibilities defined?" It doesn't have to be this granular, especially at like a startup level. But as you start hiring people and you start promising like career trajectories and growth, frameworks like this can be really, really helpful. And I'm a fan of a spreadsheet. This is my background in my econ background and my business background. Get in the spreadsheet. Doesn't have to be more complicated than this. Um, so the way this is set up, we have two paths here. We have an IC track and a manager track. A lot of thought as well here. So we've got a junior designer, just a regular designer, a senior, staff, principal, English. Those labels. Oh, my thing froze. It always loves to do this. For some reason,